Hello, friends, and welcome to the Mythological Africans podcast, where we read and talk about stories from African mythology and folklore. I am your host, Helen Tunde. It's our last episode for 2024, friends, and I can't express how grateful I am for your time, your attention, and above all, your support throughout this year. So, some quick stats. The MA podcast wrapped, if you want to call it that. We got through 44 podcast episodes this year, and in them, we covered just about every topic under the sun. So, without any further ado, here are my top 5 favorite episodes from this year. Number 1, the discussion of mythology and folklore in modern African literature, especially Tuareg mythology and folklore in Ibrahim Alkoni's Al-Majis. Egyptian writer and culture critic Ismail Fayed summarizes it beautifully when he says, one reads Alkoni's text as if one is seeing the Sahara unfold before his mind's eye with its harshness and strangeness, but also ineffable beauty. And this comes from his intimate knowledge of the topography, the climate, the flora, and the fauna of the Sahara Desert. But one also cannot talk about the Sahara Desert without talking about the sun under whose unrelenting, and what might even say, obsessive glare that landscape wreathes and waxes into and out of being. And in Almajus, the sun and the desert are locked in a relationship that reads like one of those grand enmities of fact and fiction, but which eventually reveal themselves to be grand amours, grand love affairs, right? Each party aware of and perhaps a bit resentful of the other's ability to drill to the core and extract the essence of the other. And in this relationship, the wind, the mercurial rains, the plants and animals, and the humans are their children and other members of the household whose moods and movements depend on and whose loyalties are divided between these two vastnesses. Number 2, the exploration of African musical folklore, which we did in April. Rest in peace, Bashir Abbas. Bashir Abbas was born in August of 1937 in Halfayat al-Muluk, one of the oldest neighborhoods in the northern part of the city of Khartoum in Sudan. Earlier this year, in a Facebook post to commemorate the second anniversary of his death, his daughter Alhan shared that her father grew up in a music-loving home, and his father recognized Bashir's academic brilliance and musical talent at a young age, and so gave him his first instrument, a flute. Bashir also learned to play the oud, which is the instrument you hear him playing in the background, from his cousin, a woman named Asma Hamza, who herself was an accomplished player and melodist. He developed his skill in both these instruments to eventually become one of Sudan's best-known players and the person who established Sudanese instrumental music as an art form. And what do I mean when I say Sudanese instrumental music? I'm talking about the musical style that merges the traditions of the ancient Nubian kingdoms the country emerged from with the traditions of Christianity and especially Islam, with which it has had close contact for centuries. Bashir was recognized and awarded internationally as an ambassador of Sudanese folk music. He performed at numerous international concerts, represented Sudan in musical competitions, and recorded musical programs with the BBC and many other European and foreign media houses. He was, however, best known and beloved for his support and mentorship of singers and musicians in the Sudanese musical scene. And in the course of his prolific career, Bashir composed over 50 original musical pieces and contributed to the musical portfolios of over 100 Sudanese folk musicians. And he had an 8-piece musical ensemble who, with his masterful oud playing, which has been described as groovy and earthy, he helped usher traditional Sudanese folk music into the modern era of popular music that we know now. Bashir Abbas passed away in January of 2022 at the age of 85. Number 3, the deep dive into cross-dressing in African folklore and culture, which we did in July. And I was really thrilled to learn about the Ghanaian and Togolese concert parties, as well as Yoruba Apidan theater. What do you know about Ghanaian and Togolese concert parties? I'll be honest, I'd never even heard of them before I researched this episode, but apparently, these were a form of popular theater which emerged in the 1900s as African cultures interacted with European and other cultures. And concert parties they drew on material from American movies, Latin gramophone records, African American spirituals, and African high life songs. Anansi, the superstar trickster of Ghanaian folklore, who, if you remember, will shapeshift into whatever he needs to become to achieve his aims, made frequent appearances in the Ghanaian concert theaters. And the mostly male actors who took part in these performances, they would wear makeup and dress accordingly to suit whatever roles they needed to play. Now, before you say, hey, these things came out of the interaction between African and European culture, you have to keep in mind that European and specifically British colonial administrations, their incursion into Africa happened in the context of the Victorian era. And the Victorian era, if you know anything about them, is that they had a high emphasis on morality with the Christian, undertone. Overtone even, because it was that's what it was. So I highly doubt that the cross-dressing aspects of these performances came from the European side of things alone. And this is especially so if you remember that gender fluidity in dance and other ceremonial performances is a quintessentially African thing. And also you have to remember that many of the storylines in these concert parties, especially in Ghana, had a really strong nationalistic orientation to them. So they were intended to satirize British and other Western customs. There's a picture in the episode notes of some cross-dressing performers who were quite popular in 1960s Ghanaian concert plays. Similarly, Apidan theater from the Yoruba has roots in traditional dance ceremonies, but it also includes men dressing as women to perform as women. And the word Apidan translates to the one who works miracles, and is an aspect of Yoruba traditional theatrical performance. So common roles in these Apidan theater are the Pansaga. I hope I'm saying that right. The Pansaga is the harlot, and then there's the Iyawo, who is the beautiful proper woman. And the Iyawo is usually played by the leader of the theater company. So it's not like these roles, these cross-dressing roles were side characters. No, these were major roles, which included men dressing as women to perform as women. And the other thing about Apidan theater is that these performances, they were not put on to caricaturize the women. They were full transformations into the demanded role, so they were taken very seriously. Number 4, the recently ended series on succession battles and sibling rivalries, which took us to my home country of Cameroon, and that was really fun. And it all came to a head when Tamanjo, the Fon of So, died. Now, according to tradition, his royal wives and some slaves had to be buried with him. But some of the women were, as you can imagine, not exactly ready to die, so they escaped to the Bamum lands. Now, keep in mind that according to stated agreements and treaties, each people had to return each other's runaways. And then Saw generally abided by this rule because, again, they didn't want to, tick off their bigger, powerful neighbors. But the Bamum people saw themselves as above the Saw. So when the Saw demanded that they return the runaway women, what did Nsangu, the son of Bamum, do? He killed one messenger and cut the other one's hands off and sent him back to the farm. Now, the thing is, a prince named Sembum had taken over, and he was like, okay, this is it. Once and for all, we have to teach these people to respect us. But remember that these two people, despite their hostility, they still saw themselves as family. So the idea was to teach the Bamum a lesson by conquering them, capturing Fonsango, and using him as leverage. Under no circumstances was he to be killed because it would be like killing a family member, generally considered taboo in most places. But then this is where it got tragic. Because remember, over the couple of centuries, both the Saw and the Bamum people had been expanding their land, conquering people, so they would run up against other kingdoms. And a man named Se, who was prince of the Tabesov, who were another people, had fled his father's lands after yet another succession battle. So he took his people and they ran away. They came to the Nso. The Nso gave Se and the Tabesov refugees, who called themselves the Visov, gave them sanctuary. And so this made the Visov loyal supporters of the Nso, and they were always eager to prove their loyalty. And historically, they were fierce defenders on Nso lands. And so when the Nso decided to attack the Bamum, the Visov were ready to teach the Bamum a few things, even if it meant ignoring the rules of war. And that, my friends, is why when the dust settled after the war, a Visov warrior presented the Fon of Bamum's head mounted on a spear to the Fon Nso. Fifth, but certainly not last, Dervishes and Curses, the episode exploring mental illness in mythology and folklore, which you all really loved, and for which the MA podcast got a shout out from the ever so lovely Catherine Mays. Now, in the West and thus in the global mainstream, mental illness is often defined and contextualized following the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders and other such systems. And these are systems of classification and reference published by organizations like the American Psychiatric Association. And they aim to describe mental disorders and offer healthcare providers information on how to diagnose and treat or manage these disorders, right? And what this means is that to most of us modern people for whom Western systems of knowledge are the norm, our understanding of mental illness or neurodivergence, if you want to use a broader term, is shaped by this science adjacent system, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But in indigenous societies across the world, the different constellations of behaviors that we call neurodivergence or, the broader term, oh, but that's the broader term, or mental illness, which can be a bit more restrictive. Like most matters of life or death, for better or worse, are described usually within the context of a story, right, in which a character manifests the behaviors and their relationships with the different forces that shape the lives of the people telling the story. And this could be spiritual or mundane forces, is used to explain the behavior. And it's not a scientific system in the strict sense of the word, but these ways of classification are subject to their own internal logics, which, even when imperfect, like the DSM can be, by the way, offer really deep insight about who the people believe they are and the place they can offer people who are neurodivergent. This can be a tremendous hindrance, right? We've probably all heard horrifying stories about the way people who have psychotic disorders are treated, but it also offers unique opportunities. Since people live these stories as pieces of life, the story told about a given behavior can engender a certain attitude towards the affected person in a way that knowledge of, say, the genetic origin of certain mental illnesses or, ways of perceiving the world might not. And even more, I think it opens up space for the community to learn things from these people which are, bolstered and made possible by their unique ways of perceiving the world, which, the community otherwise might not if they cast them as illnesses. Thus, a curse really can become a blessing. Interestingly, you all really like the episode on Igbo folktales in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, and all I can say to that is, Anyway, 44 episodes, over 12,000 downloads, and over 2,000 new friends from all over the world, 400 of whom are new subscribers, and that's on Substack alone. Over on X, or formerly known as Twitter, we got even more friends after I shared that delicious picture of the MA book, the upcoming Watkins Book of African Folklore. So our little corner of the internet grew by over 3,000 people in total this year, which is just mind-blowing because I was pretty convinced that once I pulled back from sharing information every day and interacting as I used to do, things would slow down quite a bit. But they didn't, and I have you all to thank for that. So once again, thank you. But you all want to know something really funny. I was actually dead set on never ever starting an MA podcast. Believe it or not, I steadily refused to start a podcast for years and years. And to be fair, I was doing daily posts on Twitter, now X, weekly and sometimes bi weekly live discussions on spaces, monthly YouTube deep dives, curating 2 book clubs, as well as giving talks and writing essays and papers and presentations. A podcast on top of all of that just seemed like yet another thing to add to the list of things I needed to do, which wouldn't really bring more to what I had to offer. And I was also a bit skeptical of the whole podcast industrial complex, as someone called it back in the day. It's a lot of podcasts out there, guys. Something I've come to realize too is that if you're not careful, online curation and the platforms and their processes kind of take a hold of you, and you jump on the content, and I hate that word, the content mill, spinning and spinning for whatever reward you can get. So I, was pretty resistant to starting a podcast for a long time. But that being said, I'm glad I whittled down my output to mainly this podcast and the monthly newsletter and the odd posts here and there and the essays, because I really feel like it gives us all a chance with just everything going on and all the volume of information that is out there to just enjoy our mutual interests in African mythology and folklore without any of the pressure. So, what's in store for 2025? Goodness only knows. Some things I have in mind though. Perhaps a closer look at the intersection of mythology and folklore and geographical place. And this is a topic I am becoming increasingly fixated on the more I learn. A little bit more reading to do though, but we'll probably hear some more about that next year. And also the way mythology and folklore move with history. And if you read the essay I wrote about neck ring use in the culture of Nigeria's Edo people, you understand why. Because basically, certain aspects of Edo mythology and the resulting material culture can be traced to the arrival of the Portuguese. And it's fascinating stuff. I'll include the link to that essay in the episode notes, but definitely more probing at this idea of how history influences mythology and folklore, and possibly vice versa. Finally, I want to do more mythology and folklore from Francophone Africa. There is actually a rich and very detailed body of work from the Wolof, the Amazi, the Tuareg, the Bambara, the Mossi, and other French-speaking West and Northern African people. I ran into some of this while I wrote the Watkins Book of African Folklore, and I think that deserves a little bit more exploration. And my book also comes out next year, and who knows what fresh delights that will come with. Either way, I am looking forward to sharing it all with you. And so, thank you again for an amazing, amazing 2024, friends, and cheers to 2025.